Hello. In the first module of the course, I have you do complete several readings about reading theory. So I wanted to take a few minutes and talk about why this is really important for your role not only as a reading teacher, but also in assessment. So I would start by saying that, as a reading teacher, everybody has a theory of reading. In other words, something that explains how it is that children come to learn how to read. Now, your theory may not be explicit. You may not have thought too much about it, but you're going to have, if you started answering that question, how do I think children come to learn to read? You'd have something to say about it. Some of you might have very specific ideas about it. Theory is important because it guides what we think about how reading acquisition occurs. It absolutely then guides how we teach it, assuming you have complete control over how you teach it. You may not. You may have to teach in a way that's dictated by a curriculum or within the school. But your overall theory would guide what you think about it. And then, of course, theory also then would direct how we go about assessing literacy or assessing reading. So in a nutshell, also, then what is a theory? What exactly is a theory? Well, theory would be especially a cognitive theory, which is what reading is. Reading deals with matters that go on inside the brain. We can't exactly see what exactly is happening, so we have to theorize it. So a reading is a theory. It's a hypothesized idea or conceptualization of how the variables involved in reading interact with each other. That's really all a theory does. A theory simply explains how several different variables interact with each other. Reading, there are all kinds of theories about reading. There really is no one theory that conceptualizes everything about reading because it's extraordinarily diverse. So we have multiple multiple theories that try to explain generally about reading, that try to explain, say, very specific pieces about reading. So I've asked you to read The Simple View of Reading. I've asked you to read the language framework around reading, and you also, in your textbook, you'll have some discussion around an interactive view of reading. I think you'll see that there's a lot of similarities between these theories, and there may also be some differences. But I want you to get the idea that there really is some specific ideas about theory. The Simple View has a huge amount of support for it. And when I mean support, I mean research, empirical evidence for it. But it really is well supported. The interactive theory, the language systems framework from Perfetti and Stafura also is very similar to the Simple View. It's stated a little bit differently. It looks differently in a diagram, but when you understand the components, it's also basically saying a lot of the same type of thing, that reading has to happen, the various processes that go to make reading happen have to be in place. They have to work efficiently with each other. And when something is not working, then the whole reading proposition becomes difficult. In other words, you end up with a student who can't read very well, who stumbles over words, can't decode words, doesn't have any prosody in their reading, perhaps has decreased comprehension or understanding of what it is that they're reading. So anyhow, this idea about reading theory is really important. I want you to leave this course with some ideas that, number one, that theory is important, and I want you to leave the course with some fundamental understandings of how reading acquisition occurs to the best of the knowledge that we have around science. So I take very much a science or an evidence-based perspective about reading, but there's much support for it across decades and decades of scientific research. So I want to expose you to these ideas because I think it's really important. Another way that a theory of reading influences a reading teacher, people who then become in charge of curriculum and who assume positions of influence within a district, it completely informs curriculum. What type of a textbook or what kind of curriculum you might choose for a reader. So, for example, I was one of the co-authors recently on a review of the Lucy Calkins phonics workshop, phonics curriculum for teaching reading. It didn't come out too well. It was myself and 5 or 6 other literacy scholars in the field because some of what goes on in the curriculum is at odds with the reading science. So the theory of reading is certainly not one that I would subscribe to. That's gone throughout that textbook or throughout that reading curriculum. So that's just an example of how a theory of reading informs then how you go about teaching it. So I hope the theories are helpful. I'll tell you that the readings can be dense. You may struggle with it somewhat. That's okay. I can completely subscribe the idea of cognitive dissonance, that for us to stretch ourselves, for us to learn, sometimes that requires that we struggle. If we don't struggle, we may not be learning anything that's new. So hang in there, and we'll have a discussion on it. Thank you.